This is the technical session, Closing the Gender Gap, Advancing Women's Workforce Participation. And to moderate the session, we welcome on stage Ms. Shruti Kutti, Senior Policy Manager, iWage. May I invite her to please join us on stage? Very warm welcome to you. And I would now like to invite on stage the esteemed panelists for this session. We welcome on stage Ms. Anupam Nidhi, Group CSR Head, Vedanta Group. Ms. Neha Menon, Member, One Dasra Leadership Team. Dr. Madhu Sharan, President, Hand in Hand India. And lastly, I welcome on stage Ms. Jayatri Dasgupta, Chief Marketing Officer, Pay Nearby and Program Director, Digital Nari. A very warm welcome to you. As you can see, it's a very strongly enforced all-women panel. So we are ready to initiate the discussion, Closing the Gender Gap, Advancing Women's Workforce Participation. I'll now hand it over to Ms. Shruti Kutti to take it forward.
Hi. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, quite ironically for this session, I'm struggling to find my voice because of this very weird weather in Delhi. I've got on a bad cold, so please bear with me. Last evening, I was wondering, how do I set the context for this conversation today without inundating all of you with numbers that we are all perhaps tired of hearing? Because these are conversations that have been happening for in the last few years, several occasions, so many $1 trillion economy, and we need to mobilize women and things like that we have been hearing. So instead I thought, it is 2025, so let's do a little bit of a recap of maybe 30 years before, that is in 1995, when the world convened in Beijing to put forward what was perhaps one of the most formidable blueprints in advancing all women and girls. And it has been 3 decades since then, and a lot has shifted, a lot has happened. Back then, I was about 5 years old, and female labor force participation rates, or FLFPR, only meant a bunch of letters put together, And that was also a time when, a few years after the 1995 declaration, sometime in 98, 99, that the government of India actually undertook the very first effort, a pilot study on the time use survey to comprehensively capture women's work, which is largely erased in national accounting systems. And in the decades to follow, we saw very important reforms, especially legislative reforms, like the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the launch of the National Rural Livelihoods Mission, and all of which have completed more than a decade now, and it has taken shape and forms that probably even policymakers back then didn't anticipate. Apart from this, there were several things that happened, but a couple of things that come to mind is the amendment of the Maternity Benefits Act, the ratification of the amendment to the Prevention of Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Act, along with a plethora of other big and small policy measures. But to pause a little bit and think about what it felt like for me as a girl growing up and thinking about women's work, is that regardless of what the numbers said, I think not just me, all of us would agree that we have grown up seeing women work all the time, everywhere. Regardless of whether it's a rural setting or an urban setting, you see women carrying load on their backs, wood on their backs, haystacks, washing clothes, taking care of children, women at construction sites, tea plantations, all while on many occasions, children by their side. So conspicuously, you see women working everywhere, but somehow the work is never counted and it doesn't show up in numbers. it was around 2017-18 when IWAGE, the Institute for What Works to Advance Gender Equality, was set up. And around that time, this number was at 23%, the female labor force participation rate. And as of last year, based on the PLFS, the number stands at 41.7%. And I promise you, these are the only two numbers I'm going to cite. And enough to actually also say that it has been quite a journey. Something that happened in between this period is what we didn't anticipate, that is the pandemic. And what the pandemic really did is that it laid bare something that we've ignored for so many decades, something that feminist economists, women's rights groups have been saying, that your economies and societies are built on the backs of women. Women who are frontline workers, domestic workers, the unpaid work that women do at home. Work that was erased suddenly became essential work. And I think that's when it took a pandemic really for this to be at the forefront. And positively so in the last few years, we've observed that gradually economic surveys and several other documents put forth by the government of India has actually categorically acknowledged that women have always been working. Women's unpaid work especially has been an impediment for them to accessing gainful employment, and it is important that we actually develop strategies to address these issues through provisioning of requisite infrastructure and services. This was also reflected in India's G20 presidency, with the New Delhi Leaders' Declaration actually putting forth the need for redistribution of care work and building infrastructure to actually alleviate women's care burden. In the last decade, there were also several other push in strengthening women-led MSMEs through several initiatives through SIDBI, MSD, skilling, the CSR initiatives that have taken shape in the last decade, and gender lens investing towards women-led initiatives has also played a very key role in this transformative change that happened in helping us reach the 41.7% number. Now, we may have agreements, disagreements on this number itself, but I think I can confidently say that we are at a remarkable inflection point with terms like Nari Shakti and women-led development becoming central to the national growth agenda. So we see that the commitment has arrived. It has taken time, but the commitment has arrived. But now is the more challenging part. How do we translate some of these commitments into action? And for that, we have with us some of the key players who are actually working towards building strategies and models, innovative models, in bringing about this change. So if I can start with you, Madhu, on sharing some of the experiences that you've had working with women from the grassroots, and what do these structural barriers look like? How do we break that down? How do we understand that? And what are some strategies or interventions that have worked in your experience?
Yeah, so thank you, Shruti, for laying such a relevant and really nice, holistic context. And good morning to everyone. Just taking forth whatever Shruti has said and sticking to just that number, 41% of female labor force participation, which is good because there has been, as Shruti has rightly mentioned, a sea of policies and work by several organizations, but that is not enough at all, because men's labor force participation stands at 77%. So this is the gender gap that we are talking, that we have to address as a collective, all of us here, through our work. And talking about Hand in Hand India, just a little bit of background. We are one of the largest NGOs working for job creation and community development. We work across 18 states, and addressing the gender gap, we have created about 11.6 million jobs for women, people living at the bottom of the pyramid, of which 90% are women. Several categories of employment for women. We have about, just briefly, 61 million women who are doing family-based enterprises. Family-based enterprises typically at hand-in-hand is where the investment is less than 50,000 and it's largely household labor. Then we have something like 1.8 lakh women who are involved in micro-enterprises. And that is where an investment is above 50,000, but with outside labor and also employment generation. And then we have 99,000 Lakpati Didis. So I'm just giving these numbers to mention how we have actually supported in closing the gender gap by getting women into the workforce, largely informal, but also now moving towards formal. Talking of structural barriers, well, to me, if you have to get women out of their homes, into the market, negotiating, traveling, skilling, you have to address first the mindset and the cultural gap, which rests very little with the women. It is largely with the family members. One thing which hand in hand has really struggled and of course succeeded, because when I'm talking about 11 million jobs, obviously we have succeeded in addressing and bringing women out there. The first is the social stigma. Household honor lying with the woman, resting with the woman. So for example, just a small example, in Rajasthan, we work with self-help groups. Hand in hand works with self-help groups. And in Rajasthan, I went to a family asking for the women to go to banks. You know, our women are with the Rajasthan Rajivika. And this old man, who was the father-in-law of this lady, so there are 3 SHG women who are going to the bank, not one. And he said, Madam ji, अकेले तो औरतें नहीं जाएंगी. In the typical Rajasthani language, एक तो लड़का, एक तो आदमी जाएगा. और वो आदमी कौन था? 12 साल का लड़का. With 3 women who were 30 plus. So this is the mindset. The social stigma. Second is, you know, the deep-rooted patriarchal, archaic tradition which leads women, as Shruti has rightly mentioned, homemakers, cleaning, washing, cooking, all the unpaid household labor vis-a-vis the paid labor which the man has to do. So this leads women into a vicious cycle of low education, low skill, low credit, low investment, low profit, and low employment. This is the gender gap that we have to break by getting women outside, and hand in hand has done a few strategies, very strategically. First, we do a lot of counseling. So coming to the key points from grassroots, a lot of counseling, mindset change of the women, talking to the women. आपको business woman बनना है क्या? आप कहती हैं हाँ, then we will talk to the family members, which is the most difficult part, because women are ready. They are like any of us, you know, want to grow. All of us want to grow. All of us want to travel. They are ready. But men and the in-laws, second step is dealing with the families. There is a huge component of our work where our field coordinators, that we call community coordinators, they are from the same vicinity. They are known to the families. So they go and counsel. And it is over a period of 2-3 weeks, trying to tell them that they will go in groups. That is how you start softly. अकेले नहीं जाएंगी, ग्रुप में जाएंगी, एक साथ जाएंगी, till training करेंगी, so on and so forth. The third is peer role models. We try and find role models from within the village, and that works the best. ये आप ही के जैसी हैं. She is no different from you, and look at her running a business. NRLM has really helped that way. So many Lakpati Didis. अगर ये कर सकती हैं तो आप क्यों नहीं कर सकती हैं? That has really worked. The fourth thing, in between themselves, having a lot of sakhis. We have digital sakhis. Do you know that now, with so much of bank sakhis, digital sakhis, for enterprises, we have something called BDSPs, Business Development Service Providers. They are the mentors who are at a higher level of empowerment, agency. They are the older women who can go from household to household to address issues of domestic violence, lack of mobility, and they have a nice authority in the vicinity to tell the males that you please get your women out, or else, I can file a police complaint. So these business development service providers are not necessarily smart entrepreneurs. They are the women who have a big say in the village. Lastly, once we get a few women out in the market, money is the biggest game changer. I will give you a small example from one of, money leads to money. And, there's interrelatedness between finance and structural change. And one of the example, we were doing an Asian Development Bank supported project for getting 20,000 women to engage in energy efficient enterprises, where we had to train them in energy efficiency. तो जो भी आप manually कर रहे हैं उसको motorize कर दीजिए. So in a small village in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhatarpur district, Bilwal, the entire village was into mud pottery. So doing manually. And then we introduced the electric wheel. So the speed of the electric, and that entire village had women in ghungat, the wheel. The speed of the electric pottery was such that they were finding it very difficult to maneuver the parda while cutting the pottery, because manually they had time. Money started coming in because the production doubled, sales doubled. Men started going to the market, which anyway they were going. So there is obviously women do housework, men do the market. Money started coming in. They realized the value of money, and this was a chance to address the biggest cultural tradition of parda. We spoke to the panchayat. नहीं madam ji, we said ये पर्दा को इतना जो करती हैं घूंघट वो मुश्किल होता है to cut the wheel. Can you just, no, it's impossible. More money. And then they said, okay, and it was a diktat order passed by the panchayat saying that from henceforth, women will not cover their head fully, they will only cover partially. So all the young brides of the village need not do it. Can you imagine? A small money coming into this entire village because of electrified entrepreneurship of pottery, which became electric, the culture barrier of parda removed from that entire village. This case has been documented in the ADB website, hand in hand. Small example of Punjab. My colleagues are here from Tamil Nadu, Punjab, Chhattisgarh. Punjab, we have this project from with the Lakshmi Mittal refinery, HMEL, since 2018. It's a very nice project. We have to work with self-help group. The entire machinery of the enterprises is given by HMEL. So anything between 5 lakh to 10 lakh, they will give the machinery. Hand in hand only has to do the, of course, it's not only, it's a big ask, the training and the market linkage part, to the tune of a certain value of the machinery. So if it's a 10 lakh machinery for Happy Seeders, RO. So when I went to Punjab in 2018, when the project started, my colleagues are here, I said, SSA, and you know how Punjab panchayat leaders are. Prosperous state, honor resting with the women, they don't want the women to come out. They said, Madam ji, हमारी औरतें तो खाली गुरुद्वारा तक जाएंगी, तो आपको जो ट्रेनिंग कराना है, जो कुछ कराना है, बस घर से गुरुद्वारा. Every local area has a small gurudwara. But then when the machineries were set up and again money started coming in, they realized that no, this is a huge gender gap and economic empowerment. Money is coming into the house. Now our women entrepreneurs are going to Ludhiana, Jalandhar, Patiala. This is a project in Bhatinda, Delhi, for market linkages. So all I'm trying to say is, to get women started, you show models, you create models, and that has a kind of a, vicious spread effect. Economic barriers are many, as you all know. Lack of access to credit. Credit is the biggest thing, but I would say information, asymmetry, access to government schemes, digital barrier. Of course, my colleagues will speak a lot about it, but I just wanted to touch on these things to begin with. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Madhu. First of all, 11 million jobs is definitely no mean feat, but I think a very important learning for us is also that when you work with communities, how do you understand what is the right time and the method to address some of these deep-seated cultural values without I mean, bringing that about organically, but thank you, great examples. I think this was a great segue, Jayatri, for you to come in and tell us a little bit about tech-enabled transformation and how digital empowerment actually has gone leaps and bounds, especially through your experience with the Digital Nari program.
Thank you so much, Shruti. So like Madhu, you were mentioning, yesterday also I was chatting up with Sanchita Ben, and she was telling me that, you know, many years back when we started the SHG movement, and I was going to this group of women in, I think, Murshidabad, she mentioned, and I was explaining them the advantages of the SHG movement and how it can help. The woman came back and saying, आपके लिए बोलना easy होता है, आपको तो घर वालों से permission लेना नहीं पड़ता है, हमें तो घर वालों के पास जाना पड़ता है. And how things have not changed even today. So when we go to communities and we talk to women, it's the same thing. When we are telling them about the advantage and the livelihood generation, the first thing that they come up with is, I still need to take permission from the husband. So the deep-rooted patriarchy and the social norms that still exist, how do we walk through them, is, I think, a challenge that all of us face in our daily lives. And, you know, one thing that you mentioned that also resonated very, very strongly is the intersection of money and how social capital can be built for the woman that gives her an agency, right? And that's a very important thing that you touched upon. And one of the pillars that we work on is how to build that economic resilience in women. So at Pay Nearby, we have always been a financial inclusion company. For the last 10 years, we have been working towards ensuring that banking and finance reach the last mile. But what we have observed is that till today, there's a large gender gap that exists in actual financial usage, whether it is savings, credit, insurance, name it. You will see there's a deep-rooted gender divide that exists across all of the services. And for women to get agency in their own lives, it's very important that they have control over their money. So livelihood and control over money is one of the pillars that will enable women to, you know, make the choices that is towards their betterment, their next generation betterment. So what we've realized, and again, you know, all of the things that I wanted to say today, Madhu has kind of touched upon it. How do we build role models in communities who then becomes the flag bearer for financial inclusion in communities? The work that we do at Pay Nearby, at Digital Nari specifically, is an intersection of tech and financial inclusion. For us to reach a large distributed geography like India, it's given that if we have to touch lives at 6 lakh villages, it has to be a combination of technology, but it also has to use local intelligence. So at Digital Nari, what we are trying to do is that across all our Gram Panchayats, we are trying to create one Digital Nari who is enabled with a mobile that can then become the tool to ensure all critical services, whether it is health, banking, finance, reach last mile communities. With that, what we are hoping is that when women have access to affordable credit, when women have access to affordable health care, when women can work from within the confines of their home, and the care work that is burdened on women today, we know that that's not going to change in a day, right? Likely to stay with us for some time. So within the confines of the time that is available to her, from the space that she can operate in and, you know, can work within her social limitations today, how can she carve out a livelihood for herself? What we have done through the Digital Nari app is create a bouquet of more than 25 plus services. So we understand that there is not one size that fits all. Different communities will have different requirements. But we are giving the woman the power to understand the need of a local environment, and basis that need, pick and choose from a modular architected app and benefit her people around. What it also does is give the woman a very sustainable empowerment, employment option for herself. So today we have more than 150,000 women, and these women come from very ultra-rural communities, whether it is in Madhya Pradesh, the mining community, or in Orissa, the hilly terrains of Orissa or Jharkhand. So they come from very rural backgrounds, they come from very ultra poor backgrounds, but with the help of the app today, they are able to earn a sustainable livelihood for themselves. And to make the program scalable, you touched upon the digital and tech resilience. So it's not possible. We understand that the digital barrier that exists today, I mean, not all women have a handset, but it is important for us that in communities we at least identify one such woman who is digitally literate, and then through her, through assisted digital means, we empower the rest of the community. So that's the model that we are working on.
Thank you so much, Jayatri. I think one thing that I'm also taking away is the customization of solutions based on the context, and they're so different in India. But okay, that's great. We'll come back to you maybe later on the interventions front. But for now, let me go to Sneha. Sneha, so I think one very big question arises. There's a lot of ideas and a lot of strategies that we want to actualize, but what about the money and what about the investment? So you've been working on this with Dasra, and if you could shed light especially around how philanthropists, particularly families, are thinking about gender equality and women's participation at large.
No, thanks, Shruti, and thank you everyone for patiently listening. And because I don't necessarily hold all the information in my head, I'm going to refer to my notes. I think at Dasra, one of the things we've sort of constantly done is try and map trends in philanthropy, particularly with families. And one of the interesting trends we observed over the last couple of years is that when women were in seats of decision making, when women were actually using their capital, and I use the word capital and investment very carefully, we saw decisions actually changing significantly. And what that means is actually 44% women as opposed to 30% men actually make decisions in terms of investing in causes that have a JEDI frame, which means that they look at gender, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and they apply an intersectional lens. Now, all of this sounds great in framing, but what does this actually mean, right? It means that they actually fund gender justice. It means that they actually fund care work. It means that they actually fund barriers, lowering of barriers that lead to systemic inequalities. So the kind of work that is needed to actually work with deep systems over a patient period of time is patient, unrestricted capital that we see women givers actually doing a much better job of influencing than men. If I can sort of share some examples that are also available in the public domain. The topic of investing in supporting or educating men and boys is quite recent. And there was a lot of pushback on that. But Rohini Nilekani actually speaks about why should the burden of women actually equipping and empowering themselves just rest on them, right? Can we actually build and empower the ecosystem around it? Can we actually look at mental health? Can we look at the many myriad, and you know, my very able panelists have already spoken about it, of intersectional challenges that women face, and can we actually fund those instead of just kind of providing a ready-made solution? We've seen Radhika Bharatram actually set up an institute that not just equips women with skills, it's called the Karm Fellowship. We've seen her actually provide employment so that there is actual money coming into the household, so that when families apne betiyon ko ghar se bahar bhejte hai, they know that they are actually also leading to sort of economic empowerment of the households. And my last but sort of favorite example is one I heard Rati Forbes saying a while ago with Forbes Marshall, which is her CSR and the group CSR, saying that how is it that when we actually put women in informal work, in factory floors and industries, we're not ensuring that they have safety, security, places for creches, for their children in those spaces. So she actually supports and is one of the anchor partners of a really great investment called the Social Compact, which we incubated with industry bodies to ensure that businesses and facilities and factories were actually ensuring that there were gender equitable spaces for women. And in summary, I think when women actually invest in women, we see intergenerational transformative change. And this is just something we've seen over and over again. And these are just three of the many wonderful women we've had the opportunity to work with. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to leave us with.
Thank you so much, Sneha. I think we all understand that when women are in leadership positions, and that's when women's needs are met. It's also reflected in the way budgets are spent in panchayats. There's several evidence to actually substantiate that, and these are great examples for especially the one around working with men and boys. The question around the construction and manifestation of masculinity has rested in very small quarters for the longest time in gender studies literature, etc. But we have a Rohini Nilekhani, I've also been following that work, coming in and saying that if you have to empower women, and I think that's what I hear from all of our panelists as well, you have to build an ecosystem, and for that you have to start working with boys, and then by extension, men. So thank you so much. If I can go to you now, Anupam, you've had a vast experience leading CSR initiatives over the years. So it's also been a space that has evolved, and I think now there is sufficient ground to look back and understand and also see where are we going forward, especially in terms of how does CSR look at gender equality, especially when it comes to women's engagement in economic activity.
Thank you for that question. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in Delhi. While there was a yellow alert, I was all jacketed, little realizing that it was enough warm. And second part that I wanted to pick up before I start with my conversations here was I could see there are more men in this audience than the women. So that's a great thing to see the fact that this means a lot to our men folk as well. Few pieces. I come in from a responsible resource mining entity called Vedanta. Hindustan Zinc is one of the subsidiaries, and I'm going to bring in a lot of reflections around that as I speak. What I want to bring about that organization as such is mining has been always a male bastion. And what we have been and our leadership has been working on for years is on the fact that it has to have women in mining, and that pipeline has to be established from an institute to an industry, from a rural village to a peri-urban region to an institute and then to an industry. And so much so that today 25% of our operations, and these mine means when I say operations as in mining operations, are led by women forces on ground. We have leaders who are leading in the mining spaces or smelting spaces, completely taking on the responsibilities of mining as a space. And that says a lot about how the world is changing. Today when I was traveling from Udaipur to Delhi, the entire flight was a complete female flight, as in it was 2 female pilots and the complete crew as well. So those are the changes that you see around you happening. And while the pace is slow, as I said, for Vedanta to bring the change of 25% women in the operations, not the enabling side, took almost like 20 years. And it's a slow pace, and you need to have persistence, you need to have patience in what we are doing. And it definitely reflects back when you're talking about in a rural space and setup that I'm going to speak about from the CSR lens. Yes, 10 years hence, we have seen a lot of structuring, restructuring, mindset change happening, boardroom discussions happening, and in not just for a sign-off, but on inclusivity, on fact that they believe in what they're doing and they own what they're doing is what the journey has been. It will still mature. I see what we could do it in 10 years. We'll maybe make it 3x in next 5 years is how I see the growth and the kind of possibilities that we have been working with. Some of the work that we have been doing, and what I thought I should bring to you was through my intergenerational mobility lens in terms of how we have been setting up the pathways. My colleagues on the panel spoke about the challenges, spoke about the opportunities, and various other aspects around it. So I would not probably speak on that. I'll kind of touch base on how we have applied some of those elements and what are the pathways look for us as from a CSR lens under the larger umbrella of Vedanta. So kind of pretty much for us, and I was writing some notes for myself this morning, and kind of what really matters around is the income education, dignity. You talked about agency, and that's a very critical piece. And kind of an intergenerational mobility pathway will only be defined when you are actually able to translate that not just at her level, but beyond her to multiple such generations that gets curated, right? So kind of few of the aspects that we work on as an organization across 15 states in India. Primarily, I'll kind of try and contextualize it for a couple of states so to bring in the perspective there. But what we have been focusing on as an organization is on looking at education per se and focusing from that space. Early childhood education, working with Anganwadis, converting them into Nandghars, because that's where we feel that's the first stop, and that's a cyclical approach that we need to look at. The vicious cycle of poverty starts there because it's nutrition, malnutrition, all of that gets built into it, right? Those are elements that we need to look at. So focus on education all through, focus on higher education, skilled employment, through skilling route by setting up institutions of our own or kind of doing those kind of partnerships. And then look at the larger children having higher aspiration because mothers are already inducted into it. They see the progress, they see the prosperity. They will ensure that the children also study, right? So that channel of education, skilling, and children also aspiring to play a bigger role is something that we have been looking at. And one quick piece that I wanted to bring out on that was, we've been running a program called Uchi Udan in Rajasthan, where we bring in youth, both, of course, 50% girls and boys, 50%, into the system. And these kids come in the 9th grade. They are from the rural areas around our operations. They come in a residential space. They stay with us for 4 years, from 9 to 12th, and prepare for an IIT, JEE kind of a space for becoming engineers. And believe me, mobilizing all of this took time. It's been 10th batch that we are inducting this year. And now the outcome is that our first batch, which passed out from their college as well, 3 years back, are placed in Deloitte, Reliance Power, and these are girls that I'm talking about. And they kind of organically came back to work with some of the industries around their hometowns, including Vedanta as well on their own. And that shows that these girls were not just a role model in their own houses, in their own homes, in their own eyes, but for many more who came in because of them, because of what they could curate as a pathway for many others to emulate. So that's one space that I really want to bring on. The other pieces, of course, we talked about financial inclusion, self-help groups, cooperatives, federations. And there's a huge history that we have as India to talk about in that space on financial inclusion, asset ownership, as well as the generational wealth, intergenerational wealth. And that's the second pathway I wanted to highlight, and there are multiple subsets to it. We have Sevas of the World and many others. We had the whole microfinance evolution in this country. And there's just so much to talk about, how women have actually played such a large role. Not just, and I'm sure Access could vouch for it, their FPOs that they've been running across India, the women-led FPOs have been very strong spaces. Sorry, I'll take another 3 minutes, yeah. So what's interesting is, by doing so, whether those are our programs like Sakhi, or for that matter, our focus on our cooperatives in Orissa, we have been able to bring in almost around 45,000 women into such cooperatives or federations via SAG route or otherwise. And so much so that if I just talk about Hindustan Zinc, Rajasthan ecosystem, we have, they have collected around 22 crores of savings with them, around 120 crores worth of lending amongst themselves. But there are challenges. Financial inclusion doesn't come in so easy. Banking, are they bankable? No, they are still not as bankable as what you and I are privileged as a lot. But then how things are changing, and we have been seeing it change for last 2016, we initiated some of these programs. And over the years now that we see, if I talk about Pantnagar, where in Uttarakhand, where we initiated, we have around 4,500 women in this federation that they have. This year, or rather I would say 12 months down the line, we had the Uttarakhand Grameen Bank giving them almost like 6 crores of financial support through their SAG route. And that was a great linkage. And that talks about the fact that banks are now seeing the power of this collective group or the collective power of these women. That's something. And another element of that is on the fact that when they have the might, when they have they are the opinion makers, they also decide for the future of their children and for some of the decisions that happen in the family. I know the time is short, but I would like to just bring in one more piece. While there are many stories to talk about, I had 6 tracks that I listed on to speak to you guys, but maybe sometime later, is on kind of breaking the grass ceiling to another space. We run a lot of work on sports, and we believe sports could be another way to bring them back into the workforce as coaches, as players. So we run academies, which are grassroots academies, which are student athlete models, where we are focusing on women and women in football, women in archery. And these are residential programs, and archery is basically kind of, and both football, we are now getting into a zone where our women's team is playing the Indian Women's League, one of the top 8 teams which is playing these leagues. This not just curates what their future likes, but how they would actually curate the future of many others around them. And I would leave it with the last word on the collective power. They had, as microfinances, they have multiple brands of their own, Daiichi, Upaya, and many others, which they run and they own. And they had a revenue of, I'm talking about the other track, but they had a revenue of around 10 crores worth last financial year. So it's a slow process, but you need to stay invested and stay focused. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anupam. I think one thing that I'm hearing is that it has taken sustained work over many decades to really, so basically staying there, working with same communities for many years before scaling. I think that's a good takeaway for a lot of the new players, that it takes time and you have to be at it for a long period till you are sure that a model has actually worked. Yeah. Just before we go to the second round, how much time do we have? Because we started late, so is there anybody from the organizers who can guide me here? Okay. No, I have one. How much more time do we have? You have 10. We have 10 minutes, right? Okay. So before we open, quickly, if we can have one round of closing remarks, that all of you can suggest some recommendations to CSO partners, private sector, and the government. Any quick couple of points at the most, and if I can just ask you to keep it to a minute. Madhu, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so I would like to have just 1 minute for policy government, because I think they are the biggest key players. One is to engage and work more with NGOs, CSOs, and grassroots organization for access to government scheme, because there's a lot of information asymmetry, and that is a huge gap. One is that. Second is also, I know the government intent is there. They have a lot of targeted women-led lending, but to just simplify aid, to have more tailored financial products, and also to simplify documentation, whether it is for Mudra, KYC, all the loans. More, and the last and the third one that I would like to see, that the government should have more established structured partnerships with corporations, CSR, for more gender responsive corporate investment, so that we just go towards high investment for women-led enterprises.
Thank you. Jayatri?
See, right here we look at the gender from different lenses, and there's so much of experience here. And all of us, when we work together, I think the change that we together can bring is much more than what we are bringing in individually. So just being more collaborative and making the discovery easier for all of us. I don't know who has to take that ownership, but someone central to come in and make this discovery process a little easier, so that the collaboration can be easier. That's one thing. And the second is, I think, gender disaggregated data, I think institutions need to really make way for that. I think that is also not easily accessible. And how do we make more gender intent products, especially like you mentioned, right? In financial inclusion, it's not easy because not everyone is at the same level bankable. So how do we create more gender intent products and services from PSU banks, MFIs, and MFIs have shown the way, right? That when there is gender intent, women are not only commercially viable, it is also transformative. So how can we flip the coin and then make more gender intent products that can make last mile impact? And the third thing, people like us, social commerce organizations that work, we are market driven, but at the end of the day, I was mentioning that there is a lot of patience capital that is required because the revenues don't come in 2 years, 3 years, right? And for us to be viable and to exist, we need partners to come in and help us in the process. So how to make that, again, that more collaborative is something that I would like to see more people working towards.
Thank you. Sneha?
No, thank you, everyone. I mean, I was going to say collaboration, but I guess we've heard that a little bit. I think from a point of philanthropy, for philanthropic capital to be really catalytic, and someone on an earlier panel today was talking about how at different stages of growth and investment, even in women, you need different kinds of capital. So I just wanted to sort of illustrate that private sector can create more inclusive workplaces. Civil society actors like my very able panelists here can actually provide innovative models and solutions. Government can actually scale these incredible models in geography and contexts that are relevant. And lastly, philanthropy can definitely provide the patient, early stage, risky capital that's needed to even set up these programs and ensure that there is proof of concept for the government to actually take it at scale. And as an ecosystem enabler, I think our job is to really bring these actors together and ensure that there is synergy for catalytic action. And I'll stop there.
I'll quickly add 2 points to it. Most of the points are covered. The first one being inclusion, financial inclusion is the next big piece that we need to really break, making them doorstep bankable. Especially I'm talking about rural areas. So what could be those methodologies, methods, as you said, the products that could be curated or pathways that could be curated for making them bankable, and that too at the doorstep. That's first. And the second one is kind of collaboration I'll reiterate on because kind of from my perspective of CSR, I think we at times kind of the government schemes or the their packages do not reach the CSI ecosystem, and they somehow become the stepmotherly kind of a treated kind of ecosystem. I would raise this question up here. NRLM and those SRLM kind of benefits don't reach the CSR-led social initiatives or the federations or SAGs, and that's an area where we need to work together because ultimately the agenda is one and the center is one, which is the woman per se. Thank you so much. I have this bell every time I speak, man. You're aiming at me.
Okay, so I think we have time for 2 questions. If there is some, yeah, I can see one hand there. Can somebody please pass the mic? And please keep it short.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for this wonderful session, but I have a question. I'm Sukriti from Ambuja Foundation, and I'm working with women from last 8 to 9 years. We are talking about from SAGs to enterprise, entrepreneurs. But I have a question from last 4 to 5 years. We, like ma'am said, the money is the major thing to bring women outside the home. But their work for domestic course is increasing day by day. They are working for their enterprise, but nobody is helping at their home. So how could we tackle that ecosystem?
Let's take another, maybe 2 questions and then we'll stop at that. But I don't see any hands. If somebody's raising their hands, you could just please stand up. Okay, I think we have time to also any other thoughts, unless there are any other questions, we have some time.
I mean, I can maybe just begin and then, happy to have here. I think the burden of, the double burden, right, of actually going out and earning a wage and actually continuing to hold the fort at home cannot just rely on the women alone, right? It's about communities actually stepping up, be it Gram Panchayat, be it district level, officials providing incentives, whether it is your maternity benefits and paternity benefits, but also really gendered norms that exist, and the broad umbrella of that is patriarchy. What can be done at a household level, and to do that, I think there are now models and practices that are emerging that are also targeted at men and boys in communities, and not necessarily saying ki sab nari ke saath hi karo, right? How much is the nari going to go through? So I think that's one pathway that we are seeing a lot of action in, and we spoke about that, but that's just one thing I wanted to share.
Yeah, so when I was talking about money is the biggest game changer to get women out, so you have to actually, division of labor really helps. And I know the drudgery is primarily on women because they are the caregivers, but you can do small, small things like help women focus on their enterprises by rotating their work in the Anganwadis. So every Anganwadi has one SHG woman who works for 8 hours so that the other women can go to the field. Sometimes training programs at hand in hand, we always customize the training programs. कभी हम सुबह कर लेते हैं, कभी शाम को कर लेते हैं, so that they are able to focus on their enterprise. The whole ecosystem is such that they are able to focus on dedicated 4 hours, 4 to 5 hours, उससे ज़्यादा नहीं हो सकता है. Apart from household responsibilities, 4 hours or 5 hours of work at the enterprise. In Punjab, when we have huge orders from vendors, a lot of times our own community coordinators work with the women, telling their husbands and mother-in-laws, "Aaj khana aap bana lijiye." So mentors are very, very important. So these are some of the practical things that you do.
Okay. I don't see any more hands raised. Okay, there's one. I think that'll be our last question as well, and then I'll sum up.
Hi, this is Poorna. I head the organization called Trickle Up India Foundation. It's just a commentary. I think when we talk about a gender intentional program vis-a-vis a gender transformative program, there's a huge journey even there. I think we are just about beginning to talk about intentional programs, but extremely important to have a transformative lens, because if we are not addressing social norms at the core, where you all spoke about the systemic problem. But even, for example, I worked in the sector of digital financial services, where you're doing a doorstep delivery to address the issue of mobility of women. But sometimes in our programming, we are actually reinforcing the gender norms without putting that into the design of it. So I think whoever is designing, be it a private sector, be it a CSO, be it the government, we oftentimes do to benefit the women without seeing the backlash of it, which oftentimes also leads to reinforcement of those gender norms that we are trying to address. So just wanted to park that out there.
Okay, thank you. So unless there are any closing thoughts, let me just sum up. I think based on some of the thoughts that emerged, especially in the last few points that our panelists have made, there's clearly a need to address the information asymmetry. I mean, there are some great schemes. So why is it that we don't have enough beneficiaries? Something that we keep seeing also when we look at gender responsive budgeting and seeing that, hey, there's money, but it's not being spent, which means that there is that gap that clearly needs to be addressed. And reducing the drudgery that comes with documentation and bureaucratic processes, especially for services targeting women. I think collaboration is something that goes without saying, but more substantive collaboration and understanding how our efforts can dovetail into each other and not repeat and duplicate efforts and spend money on things repeatedly instead of actually finding the right places to put that money into. About data, I will actually take that a step further and say not just gender disaggregated data, but gender responsive data, because your default user or your default respondent for any survey or administrative data is a man. So sometimes it doesn't even occur to you that you need to ask that extra question to make sure your data is gender responsive. Around, financial inclusion, again, and digital inclusion, key enablers going forward for women and for marginalized groups at large, I would say. Around the linkages with SRLM, NRLM, and programs run by CSR and CSOs, needless to say, definitely a gap. that needs to be filled, and efforts need to come from both, all parties involved. Around innovation and philanthropy, and I'll end with this also to speak to your question around the drudgery of unpaid work and care work. There's a lot of innovation that's also happening from the government, and we are always looking at private sector and other innovators. Just a simple example, in Karnataka, in the state of Karnataka, the Kusina Mane scheme, which basically involves provisioning of creches at Manrega sites, where the funds for the creches mobilized through the RD, the Rural Development, the Gram Panchayat and Zilla Parishads, as opposed to the expectation that the money for creches should come from the Department of Women and Child Development. Because why should childcare be the mandate of the WCD or the Women and Child Development alone? So looking at collaborations within government ecosystems and coming up with these innovative financing solutions, basically optimally using the budgets that actually exist, and some of the examples pointed out by our panelists, optimally utilizing existing infrastructure like the Anganwadi services, like the child creches. How can we strengthen this infrastructure by maybe provisioning of supplementary workers, extension of hours? All of these are things that are that require us to put our brains together. But most important thing, I think, the answer around innovation lies more in tapping in existing infrastructure and using money to really only bridge the gaps and not creating bigger gaps. So thanks a lot for this, to this really patient audience, and thanks to the Access Livelihood, the Livelihoods team for putting this panel together. Thanks.
Thank you for being a part of this discussion. May I request you all to please join us front and center for a group photo op. We thank our esteemed moderator and the panelists for this very insightful discussion.